My name is Sarah Alger. I'm the director of the Russell Museum. Thank you all for being here on this rainy night. We are very excited about this lecture. This is our first sort of co-sponsored lecture with another museum, so we're very excited about this. With our neighbor up the hill, the Nichols House Museum, and I'm certainly looking forward to learning a lot more about Dr. Arthur Nichols. Just a couple of museum notes. I'll pass around a clipboard through the audience. If you're not already a member of our mailing list, feel free to sign up. And the next lecture in our series will be on December 8th. It will be given by a neurologist here named Anne-Louise Oaklander about basically a medical mystery that she helped unravel about a disease called small fiber polyneuropathy, which I think will be really fascinating. So I'm going to pass this around, and with that, I would like to introduce Victoria Glazomitsky, the Executive Director of the Nichols House Museum.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you to the entire team here at the Paul S. Russell Museum of Medical History and Innovation at Mass General Hospital. I'm Victoria Glazomitsky, the Executive Director of the Nichols House Museum, and it's my pleasure to also welcome you on behalf of that museum, and really delighted by this collaboration that we have with a local neighbor in the MGH Museum. As you will soon learn, the Nichols family has a long history with MGH and with this museum as well. Dr. Nichols was affiliated with Mass General Hospital while he practiced medicine. And the Nichols family was also very deeply connected with music, art, and theater and creative expression at large. We continue to investigate the nature of creative expression at the Nichols House Museum, and I invite those of you who have not been to the museum to come and learn more about this fascinating family. Tonight would also not be possible by a very special fund established by Julie Linsdell and Georgia Linsdell Enders in support of the Nichols House Museum's summer research interns. You will hear in a moment from this past summer's intern, Danielle Rabinowitz. She is a first-year medical student at Harvard Medical School here in Boston. Danielle graduated magna cum laude from Harvard University and New England Conservatory's dual degree program for music composition. Therefore, the topic of Dr. Nichols' bell ringing connects to Danielle's personal and professional pursuits. Danielle has composed over 100 works of music and is the recipient of a number of musical awards, including the ASCAP Morton Gould Young Composer Award. She has also been a National Foundation for Advancement of the Arts Young Arts finalist, an MTNA National finalist, a New York Art Ensemble Emerging Composer, and the Karen Sokolov-Javich International Composition Competition winner. And so now, without further ado, I welcome Danielle Rabinowitz, musician and doctor in the making, to talk to us about Dr. Arthur Nichols, physician and bell ringer. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, for that lovely introduction. So before I jump into the details of this talk tonight, first of all, I wanted to extend my thanks to everyone who's made it out in this rainy weather. I'm so appreciative of your coming out to hear this wonderful story about Dr. Arthur Nichols and his pursuits as both a physician and a bell ringer. But additionally, I'd like to extend my thanks to not only the entire staff of the Nichols House Museum, but in particular to Ashley Bannon for making this hugely fruitful project possible. To Ashley for introducing me to the wealth of archival resources available at the Nichols House Museum, and for talking to me regularly throughout the summer to help me develop my project. As Victoria also mentioned, I'd like to extend my thanks to Julie Linsdell and to Georgia Linsdell Enders for making the fellowship possible, and also to the librarians at the Schlesinger Library at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard College, and to the librarians at the Massachusetts Historical Society. When I embarked on this project at the beginning of the summer, I, as well as the Nichols House Museum, did know the bare bones of Dr. Nichols' life as both a physician and also as a bell ringer, as I've mentioned a number of times already. But we really didn't know much about the details of either of those parts of his life. And so what I set out to do from the very beginning was to elucidate all that he brought to both the worlds of medicine and also to the world of music. So I want to thank Victoria again for the lovely introduction on myself. As she did touch on, I'm a first-year medical student at Harvard Medical School, but I do also have a dual interest in music and just recently completed my master's degree in classical composition from New England Conservatory. So similarly, I do stand on the threshold of two different vibrant worlds, and it's always exciting for me to look at other people who have similarly expressed interest in both. The first time that I ever delved into historical research that looked at the intersection between music and medicine was actually as an undergraduate at Harvard College, where I majored in the history of medicine and embarked on a wildly fascinating, for me personally, thesis project that shed light on an amateur vocal group formed by 4 physicians in the 19th century in Edinburgh, Scotland. And the project itself examined the impact that this group had on invigorating the medical community there and on reinvigorating the musical life of the city during the 19th century. Looking at the historical intersections between medicine and the arts has become a real passion of mine. I'm particularly interested in cultivating historical exemplars as a means of highlighting the enriching role of music and artistic engagement more generally in the lives of successful physicians. My hope in doing so is to hopefully convey the importance for healthcare professionals, now more than ever, of continuing to find outlets to help facilitate humanism in a world of growing technicality, efficiency, and demand. In the spring-summer 2015 issue of Columbia University's magazine, the feature article, Doctor's Notes, highlights an array of aspiring physician-musicians currently studying at Columbia's College of Physicians and Surgeons. In perusing the individual stories of the students included, among which are 3 concert-level pianists, a French horn player, and a violinist, the most striking theme that emerges is that of a distinct bifurcation for each of them between their musical and medical involvements. As they individually reflect on gearing up for their impending years of intensive clinical training, they each acknowledge the necessity for compartmentalization in regard to their artistic pursuits. That is, each of these trainees has come to terms with the fact that if only temporarily, their vocational engagements will inevitably outplay their avocational ones. And yet, as the violinist of the group comments, they are all of the belief that, quote, if you set aside time for something you love, it will never go away, end quote. In many ways, the outlook of these young medical trainees mirrors that of my research subject, Dr. Arthur Howard Nichols. Arthur's rigorous work schedule, which did not let up for many years following his launch into the medical world, represented a grave obstacle in allowing him to pursue to the fullest degree his artistic passions for a number of decades. And yet, his love of music, and of bells in particular, never faded into the backdrop. When he did find time to engage musically, increasingly so as his duties as physician shifted, he came away revitalized and ready to delve again into his medical obligations with enhanced vigor. So in introducing my research subject more in depth, I'd like to start off with a quotation that was delivered in a March 1923 Harvard Graduates magazine publication that memorialized Dr. Arthur's life and legacy. A classmate of his from the Harvard College class of 1862 wrote, end quote, in contemplating the life of Arthur Nichols from the standpoint of a friendship of almost exactly 70 years, one striking feature stands out as most unusual in anyone's career, and that is that the vocation of his life work is overshadowed in the public mind by his avocation, in which he stood among the world masters of an art. Dr. Arthur Howard Nichols was recognized during his lifetime as both a prominent Boston medical practitioner and accomplished bell ringer, who worked tirelessly to help others and to share his musical gift with the world. This talk will therefore examine the unique combination of Nichols' vocation and avocation, bringing to the surface a powerful historical example of musical-medical intersection. I will discuss Dr. Nichols' early life and career, his interest in music as a young medical man, his work as a Boston physician, and his serious involvements from the 1890s forward in bell ringing, which not only involved honing his own skills, but also reintroducing a lost art form in Boston and passing along his musical interests to his youngest daughter, Margaret. So to start off, Arthur Howard Nichols was born in 1840. He was the son of a well-established carpenter and owner of a New England granite quarry. And Arthur spent his early childhood in the bustling yet congested area of Boston known as the North End, which we all refer to as the land of cannolis nowadays. And he spent every Sunday of his childhood attending church services at the Old North Church, which was known as Christ Church at the time and still stands today. So, from a very, very young age, following in the line of his father, who similarly had a love for bells and listening to them each week, Arthur had a real interest in listening to them, at the beginning simply as an enthusiastic listener. But very early on, actually only at the ripe old age of 10, he was selected as the special chiming assistant to the church sexton at the church. And actually that required him to travel to the church every Sunday as he had, but to have a special role in the church services, helping to chime the bells after services each week. And remarkably, this is something that he fell in love with and continued to do consistently through his time at the Endicott schools and the Boston Latin schools, and actually even after his matriculation at Harvard College in 1858. In looking at his diaries, he wrote after matriculation there that he spent many of his spare hours attending the church services at Old North Church, and he even walked home every Sunday in time to ring the bells. Interestingly though, while Arthur did express a love of music from a very early age, he also expressed a real love of science, and that catapulted him into a career in medicine. He graduated from Harvard College in 1862, and immediately in the same year enrolled at Harvard Medical School. As Victoria mentioned in introducing Dr. Arthur Nichols, one of the first clinical experiences that Arthur actually had was as an apprentice, as a house surgeon for the Massachusetts General Hospital. So I think he would be very pleased to know that a speech delivered about his legacy was held here at the very place in which his medical career began. For the next 2 years, Arthur studied at Harvard Medical School, attending classes and also pursuing his role as apprentice at Massachusetts General Hospital. And he received his medical degree in 1866. From the years of 1866 to 1868, he traveled to Vienna and to Paris, where he pursued additional medical studies in anatomical subjects in particular. So this is the Bulfinch building where he began his studies. And a picture of his Harvard Medical School class of 1866. Forgive me for my date, that wasn't correct up there. Now what's interesting is that I was actually able to get my hands on some correspondence that he sent to his mother while he was abroad in Vienna and Paris studying anatomical subjects between the years of 1866 and 1868. What's interesting about the materials themselves is that although they do focus primarily on the subjects he was studying while he was there medically, they did also mention his particular interests in music that he continued to pursue and think about while he was studying. In a letter dated May 6, 1864, Arthur writes to his mother of the tragic loss of, quote, one of the world's greatest composers, Giacomo Meyerbeer, and of his subsequent plans to attend a performance of the late composer's magnum opus, an opera that would soon be premiered at the Theatre Lyric. Later in 1868, while he was studying in Vienna, he wrote to his mother, and quote, I continue to get along finely on the piano and practice every spare moment I can get, which now amounts to about 4 hours daily. Though to do this, I have to give up nearly all my evenings. So to be honest, this doesn't sound too different from my time so far, studying and music and sleep. That said, although we can see the streams of his musical interests from very early on, Arthur did have professional obligations that he had to tend to. And when he arrived back in Boston in 1868, he immediately opened a Boston-based clinical practice. So here's Dr. Nichols pictured as a young practicing physician. And just to give you a little bit better sense of our timeline, Arthur was 28 years old when he opened his practice. In 1869, just a year after he started his professional career in Boston, he married Elizabeth Fisher Homer, and in the ensuing decade welcomed 3 lovely daughters, Rose in 1872, Marion in 1873, and Margaret in 1879. Dr. Nichols opened his private practice as an allopathic general practitioner at 130 Warren Street in Roxbury, and he primarily spent his time seeing patients at both the Warren House in Roxbury and also through making home visits. In addition, he had an vested interest in anatomical subjects for which he had pursued studies in Vienna and Paris, and therefore he took on positions in surgery in the city. In 1869, being selected as the staff surgeon at the Chardon Street branch of the Boston Dispensary, and in 1870, being named the surgeon at the discharged soldiers' home. He was also very active in medical clubs in Boston, elected as secretary of the Norfolk District Medical Society in 1872. He was a strong member of the Massachusetts Medical Society, which continues on today. And he was also a, quote, active and useful member, end quote, of the Roxbury Medical Club until his resignation in 1886. This is his wife, Elizabeth. So as a general practitioner, Dr. Nichols' patient demographic was actually split, and it depended on the time of year that it was. From May to September of each year, he took up residence as physician at Rye Beach, New Hampshire. He provided medical care to those vacationing in the resort town during the summer months, and at the same time allowed Elizabeth, his wife, and his beautiful girls to, quote, enjoy the benefit of the salubrious air. And for the following 2 decades, he continued to see patients at the Warren House and at Rye Beach, switching between the 2 practices according to season. That said, however, as his daughters grew older, Dr. Nichols and his wife, Elizabeth, realized more and more that it was perhaps important to expose them more directly to the cultural offerings that the metropolis would provide for his daughters. And that actually prompted he and his wife to make the decision to move from Roxbury to Boston proper. So in 1885, when Dr. Nichols was 45 years old and he had 3 young children, he purchased the Bullfinch House, which is actually where the Nichols house stands today, and quickly moved his family to that residence. And in conjunction with the move, he actually changed his patient demographic, and so he started to see patients primarily in Boston, as opposed to in Roxbury, where he was previously seeing them at his old home. That said, by the 1880s, Dr. Nichols also made a strategic career move and opted to shift his practice from primarily a clinical one to one that was more associated with medical legal work. And so what that meant is that from the 1880s onward, Dr. Nichols very often served as an expert witness in myriad medical harm cases brought against industrial companies throughout New England and beyond. And just to give you a sense of what he was doing, he typically produced medical and surgical reports and testified before various court juries. And that earned him, as you can imagine, a healthy amount of additional income on top of the clinical work that he was doing. However, Dr. Nichols, of course, wanting to maintain a full patient practice and also wanting to continue to do a lot of consulting work for these industrial firms, quickly became overwhelmed in his dual role. And in October of 1891, he confided in his diary that, quote, I am now leading practically the life of a hermit, rarely meeting an acquaintance, and that as a result, I am satisfied about my decision to not solicit patronage, but to wait quietly until my services are sought. So at this point, this was in the early 1890s, Arthur made the decision to shift over to largely medical legal work as opposed to clinical work. And at the same time, he and his wife decided to purchase a new summer home in Cornish, New Hampshire in 1893, and he opted to, in addition, no longer serve as resident physician at Rye Beach. So in 1895, this represented his definitive withdrawal from Rye Beach and really his primary shift to medical legal work generally. He writes again in his diary, "The loss of this lucrative practice at Rye Beach involves a material reduction in professional income, which cannot be made up by work done in Boston." Though he was very aware of this, of course, the medical legal consulting work that he was doing, especially because it was for big companies, really did afford him enough income and even more to be able to provide the cultural experiences for his daughters moving forward. And what was very important about this shift in his work was that it actually allowed Dr. Nichols to be more free during the summers and to have time to pursue summer travel and to ultimately rekindle his vested interests in bell ringing and in music more generally, which he had held from a very young age. So this is the Bullfinch House, which is now the home of the Nichols House Museum, where Arthur and his family moved in 1885. This is in Beacon Hill, so very close to MGH, and as Victoria mentioned, throughout his career, he was affiliated in some way or another with MGH and the medical scene around the hospital here. So getting back to what I was talking about this important shift for Dr. Nichols from a clinical role to a more consultant role as a physician. He had much more time during the summers, but he also had more time generally and a more free schedule to be able to integrate much more so his interests in bell ringing. So in 1893, he collected 8 Englishmen, all ringers, and organized them as the Old Colony Guild of Bell Ringers. So all of these Englishmen that he collected were members of the Ancient Society of College Youths, which was the oldest and most prestigious English bell ringing society established in 1637. And they had all come to the US, come to Boston, and had been unable for many years to really continue their own pursuits and their own love of bell ringing. And so bringing them together was very powerful and important for these men, in addition to Dr. Nichols, who didn't quite have the skills yet to really do much, but he did enjoy gathering the group together and basically serving as moral support while they rang for him, and primarily on handbells at the beginning. So the group met regularly at Christ Church or at 55 Mount Vernon Street, which was where the Nichols house is located, to practice handbell ringing. So as Dr. Nichols sort of spent time with the Old Colony Guild, he more and more desired to hone his skills as a bell ringer, as a handbell ringer, but also sought to learn the art of change ringing, which was a secondary area of expertise for the members of the Old Colony Guild. So let's see, I'm not there yet. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of history about change ringing itself. So 60 years before the formation of the Old Colony Guild in 1893, the bells at Old North Church, where, as you might remember, Dr. Arthur Nichols had initially been exposed to bells, had been immobilized, interestingly enough, so that the church sexton there could actually chime the bells each week without the requirement of skilled change ringers on hand. So in other words, the bells were actually stuck to the sides of the bell tower, and all the sexton did was strike the bells. And so they were no longer pulled, and you could really, although they did emit a beautiful sound, at least Dr. Nichols thought that the sound was beautiful, it really didn't honor the original use of the bells when they were first installed. So that said, as I mentioned, 60 years before this 1893 formation of the Old Colony Guild, the bells had been immobilized. But actually, change ringing had flourished at Christ Church previous to that. And this was actually where the first North American peal of 8 bells was installed in 1744. In fact, Paul Revere was said to have earned his keep as a young man through serving as a regular change ringer at this very church. So there was a profound history, and so Dr. Nichols, I think because of that, really did want to hone his own skills in order to bring the tradition back to Boston. And to clarify for people who may still be wondering what exactly change ringing is, change ringing is an ancient art that was primarily developed in England in the 17th century, and it requires a group of ringers to coordinate with one another to ring what's called a peal of bells according to a pattern of mathematically predicted changes, which are oftentimes announced by a conductor. The most common methods utilized are known as the Grandsire and Stedman methods, both of which apply slightly different variants of permutation-based ringing patterns. The number of bells in the given set determines the full name of the method, with the most numerous being sets of 5, known as doubles, sets of 7, known as triples, and sets of 11, known as chinks. I'm not quite sure how the Latin aligns, but we'll leave it at that. On the topic of change ringing, Dr. Nichols once remarked, and quote, "It is the most difficult of all arts, as it requires, besides steady nerves and physical strength, the power for instantaneous mathematical calculations." So interestingly enough, not only was this art for him, but it was also a challenge because it required this very fast permutation. So it was because of this, and as I mentioned, because of the strong history of change ringing in Boston, that Dr. Nichols, from the 1890s onward, really wanted to reintroduce the lost art of change ringing in Boston. And this led to a massive restoration project that he led in Boston at Old North Church between the years of 1893 and 1894. Where he actually changed the formation of the bells there from their immobilized form to what was now back to the change ringing form. And that would ultimately allow the Old Colony Guild to really ring them as they were supposed to be rung. So on April 19th, 1894, the bells were, quote, pealed after that fashion for which they were cast 150 years ago. So this was very exciting for Arthur, and I think it represented for him a first step in the revitalization of change ringing in Boston. But as you might recall, he hadn't quite honed his skills yet. So it was really something that he was doing more from an appreciator perspective. But he actually did want to learn the art, both of bell ringing, which was linked in some way, both of handbell ringing, which was linked in some way, and also of change ringing. And so this led to a trip to Europe in the summer of 1894 when Arthur was 54 years old. He, as I mentioned earlier as well, was now free during the summer because he no longer took up a post at Rye Beach as a resident physician there. And so he sought to learn more about change ringing on English soil. But in addition to that, he also wanted to expose his 3 young daughters to European culture. So that was something that was hugely important for him, and actually was one of the other reasons why he moved to Boston proper as well. So he and his wife were, from the very beginning, very, very interested in pushing forward sort of a cultural education for their daughters. So back to this trip to Europe that he took in 1894. As I mentioned, he was incredibly motivated to become a change ringing expert. And because of this reduced summer work schedule, he, Elizabeth, Rose, Marion, and Margaret boarded the SS Kaiser Wilhelm and set out on a trans-European adventure in May of 1894. While the first month of the journey was actually not supposed to be about bell ringing at all, if we examine Arthur's diary, we can see that he was somewhat consumed all along with bells. I'm not sure the rest of his family was so incredibly pleased by his emphasis in every major city on looking for the important features of the bell towers, but nonetheless, Arthur did write about them. So, for example, in Italy, while in Florence, he reports about his ascension to the campanile of the cathedral to examine the 6 bells that were hung there. And he even remarked in his diary, quote, "If it were raised in the yoke," meaning the bell, "it could be rung up higher, in which case not only would its sound be augmented, but its overtones would be brought out." The ringing following a mass celebrated at 8 a.m. in the chapel at the Vatican when the family visited Rome. And he continues on to write more about the bell towers that he examined in Siena and Venice, in addition to visiting the major sites with his family. So the family continued on all throughout Europe to the Dolomite. They traveled to the Dolomite Mountains, to Basel, to Vienna, actually where Arthur also did a little bit of consulting work at a hospital. And then they continued on through Amsterdam and Brussels, where Arthur made his family visit 2 churches and an ancient bell foundry there. And then, of course, they naturally had to travel through Paris and look at the bells at the Notre Dame Cathedral. That was probably a necessary one for them. But then, it was time to go to London. And at this point, I think Arthur had been quite clear with his family. He truly intended to devote all of his time while on British soil to honing his craft. And so I think they were aware at this point that they would give him the time and space to allow for him to really do that. Because of Arthur's connections with the members of the Ancient Society of College Youths that had formed the Colony Guild that Arthur helped form in 1893, he was actually given a number of introductions to famous bell ringers who manned various towers in London. So it was very easy for him to just slip in and get many instructional experiences with this amazing set of bell ringers. So his first experience was actually not quite in London, but in Canterbury, where he describes that due to the similarity between what he says are the short rock stop stays of the Christ Church bells in Boston and those of the Canterbury Cathedral, he gained valuable insight for instruction by the leader of the guild there as to how these stays acted on their sliders. So that was his initial introduction into some of the mechanics of chain ringing. But when he got to London, he really honed his craft even more so, traveling to St. Martin's in the Field, where steeplekeeper John W. Mansfield helped Arthur practice his ringing technique and gave him an in-depth tour of the bell chambers. And later, he was accompanied by Mr. Arthur Hughes of the Whitechapel Bell Foundry, which I will talk about more in depth later because that became a profoundly important connection for Arthur. He was able to visit parish churches at St. Matthew's, Bethnal Green, where he mounted the ringing chamber and was presented to veteran ringers. In his diary, Arthur was actually quick to commend himself about his skills that he was gaining. I'm not sure he was quite a master at the point at which he was learning this, in England. That said, however, he wrote in the summer of 1894, upon managing the ropes for a touch of grandsire triples, that he was able to successfully execute the task with, quote, no appreciable effort, and that, quote, the interval between the strokes was as even as the scale running of a skilled pianist. So he was clearly very pleased with his progress as he made his way through the English bell towers. In addition to learning how to handle the bells, he also had the opportunity to listen to many bell rings that occurred throughout England during his trip. He was extended numerous invitations, and he heard the bells at St. Margaret's at Westminster, at All Saints in Kirkcallam, and he heard the bells at the famed St. Paul's Cathedral, where he wrote, quote, "The rapid success of strokes upon so many bells is difficult to follow. The roar of so many tons of metal is majestic." So of course you can imagine he was imbued with a strong desire upon his return to Boston to reawaken chain ringing in Boston. And he returned in the fall of 1894, incredibly excited to continue on his quest, not only to hone his own skills more so, but also to help invigorate chain ringing in Boston. But as you might imagine, his vocational obligations were calling, and that led actually to his, quote, "almost continuous attendance in court for many, many months in that fall of 1894, but extending on into the winter and even into the early spring. That said, however, of course, he was all consumed with bells in every moment that he had the time to think and wasn't in court doing his medical legal consulting work. He was thinking about bells, either in the context of attending practices with the Old Colony Guild on handbells, or now as a change ringer at Old North Church, where the bells were now rehung in the way that they were 150 years ago. So if we, I keep mentioning that, if we look in his diary, just to sort of pause for a moment, I spent most of the summer reading his diaries, which really weren't scrutinized too much before this, and so everything that I'm bringing about, of course, it exposes this wonderful chronology of his life, but we're really getting at the nitty-gritty of what he did on a day-to-day basis that I think we didn't really know about before I looked into some of the archival sources. And of course, I think if anyone was to look in it before, we would be looking more so at what he was doing medically, but my project was focused on the sentence or two that he mentioned at the end of each diary entry that really focused on the bells. So, for example, in 1895, when he was doing consulting work in New York City, he actually made a point on his one spare day off on a Sunday from his attendance in court to travel to Philadelphia to visit Christ Church, inspect the bells, and ring a peal there. Dr. Nichols, from 1894 onward, also fostered a very strong relationship with the Whitechapel Bell Foundry in England. As I mentioned before, Arthur Hughes was one of the men that actually was willing to take Arthur around and introduce him to different men in different towers during that 1894 trip. And so through consistent letter writing, he fostered this relationship. And this was actually a powerful partnership that eventually served as a catalyst in revitalizing change ringing in New England and beyond. Not only did Arthur begin sending bell-related publications of his and his colleagues in the Old Colony Guild, but he also ordered the first of many shipments of handbells and related paraphernalia. In 1896, in the summer of 1896, he took yet another trip to Europe, this time with his middle daughter Marion, not only to visit Spain and to expose her to Spanish culture, but also to reconnect again with English bell ringers of the college youths, who he had befriended personally and professionally in 1894. So while he had Marion visit local museums when they visited London, he himself visited St. Martin's in the Field, just as he had in his previous trip to the British capital. This time, however, he wasn't coming in as a novice. He actually came in and worked to distinguish himself as a skilled change ringer. And what this led to was actually his receipt of a certificate of membership into the Ancient Society of College Youths. So he was really recognized on English soil for his skill, and that was no easy feat. And so he was incredibly proud. And not only was he proud, this actually gave him profound privileges, not only in England. It allowed him the ability to go to any tower he wanted and become a member of the ringing team. But it also gave him a powerful credential as a change ringer in Boston. And in fact, he was now Boston's premier change ringing authority. So although medical legal work continued to occupy most of Dr. Nichols' schedule when he returned to Boston, in fact, one of the people that he consulted for during the time wrote a letter to him in 1898 saying, quote, that for honesty, decency, and ability as a practitioner and medical legal expert, you are second to none. He did continue to keep bells very close at hand and was always thinking about them. In 1900, when Arthur was 60 years old, his bell ringing activities actually picked up steam. And coupled with the fact that his workload was lightened not only in the summers, but also because he was reaching an advanced age, 60 at that time was getting up there, although we can keep people alive much longer than that now, thanks to modern medicine at MGH. His change ringing goals actually widened in scope. And so he not only sought to continue practicing himself, but he actually sought to install bell sets in various Boston towers and to encourage a more widespread adoption of bell ringing and of change ringing. Secondary to that, he also wanted to pass on his legacy to his youngest daughter, Margaret, who was now 21. She actually recounts that, quote, it was not till I was through school that I had my first lesson on how to handle the rope of a swinging bell. So the first installation project that Dr. Nichols helped spearhead in partnership with the Whitechapel Bell Foundry was the installation of a set of bells at the Groton School in 1900. And on November 30th of 1900, Margaret, Arthur, and 7 other members of the Old Colony Guild, quote, opened the ring there. So this also helped Arthur establish a long and profound relationship with the Groton School, which continued on actually until the year before he died in 1923. He consistently went and inspected the bells there and instructed some of the students in the art of change ringing. In the summer of 1902, Arthur traveled together with Margaret to England so that she could learn from the same cadre of college youth members who had imbued him with invaluable change ringing knowledge roughly a decade beforehand. Dr. Nichols made a trip to London the preceding summer in order to continue in 1901, in order to continue honing his skills on the bells. And it was while he was there that he hatched his plan to introduce his youngest daughter firsthand to the British change ringing world. Because of the fact that Dr. Nichols was an esteemed member at this point of the Society of College Youths in England, all of the ringers in various towers were very excited to welcome Margaret and to help her in any way that they could to pass along change ringing skills. And Arthur wrote in a letter to Elizabeth on August 1st, 1902, quote, the ringers in all parts of London manifest great admiration for Margaret. And in making daily improvements, she ought to be able to master the 4 standard methods in a few weeks' time. So Margaret actually was quite lucky, and she was able to work under the tutelage of Dr. Challis F. Winnie, who was at that time the most famous bell ringer in England. So you can imagine that with his guidance, she was very, very quickly able to pick up all the skills of any advanced change ringer in England. And remarkably, on August 8th of 1902, Margaret completed her first peal, ringing 5040 changes at St. Mary's Acton in just under 3 hours. So this is the certificate, actually, that Arthur received in 1896 from the Ancient Society of College Youths. And this is Margaret after completing her first peal, which was truly momentous. She became only the 2nd woman ever to be elected into membership of the Ancient Society of College Youths in 1902. and actually the first female American to be elected into membership. So following Margaret's first ring, she received a wealth of congratulatory letters and invitations to hear ringing in different London towers along with her father. She therefore made a name for herself among English bell ringers. And here's Arthur, not looking too happy, although I can assure you in his letters to his wife he was incredibly pleased. Pictured with Margaret in London in 1902, and this was on the same day that she completed her first change ringing peal. Now, what was interesting about what Arthur wrote following the trip when he returned to Boston is that actually he seemed to have some sort of revelation about his avocational pursuits upon return. And he writes in his diary in the fall of 1902, quote, "I've had the best sort of rest, enjoying the music of bells and our experience in associating with men with whom we have so much in common. I believe I can accomplish more work in the coming winter from having directed my mind during the summer to matters quite distinct from profession or business. For Dr. Nichols, his bell ringing activities pursued to the fullest during the summer months served as a refreshing counterpart to a life otherwise steeped in medical work." So, as I mentioned before, although Arthur did allude to the fact that he was returning to work as a physician in 1902, he really did have much more of a fluid schedule. And so from this time forward, he was able to pretty seamlessly integrate much more of his interests in bell ringing into his daily life. Let's see. And Margaret, similarly, because she was now skilled as a change ringer, grew into her role as a change ringing specialist alongside her father in Boston. This is actually a later picture of Margaret with handbells. She continued to hone her craft over the years. So I'm getting the sense that I'm running out of time, although I could keep going for quite a while. But let me just give you sort of a summary of what continued on. As I mentioned, Arthur Nichols not only continued to hone his own skills, but he actually helped install a number of different sets of bells all over Boston. So most of the major bell towers that we now see today, standing and being rung in Boston, were installed by Arthur, or the installation projects were led by him. So we can owe most of what we hear, on Sundays to Arthur, our friend Arthur. One of the other major projects that he helped lead in terms of installation was the installation of a peal of bells at the University of Chicago. So he was probably best known for that beyond Boston, and he was able to raise $10,000 for a Whitechapel Foundry Commission. And so those bells are still at the University of Chicago today, and are certainly valued there. So, to sort of sum up all that I researched about Arthur Nichols, and of course there's much more that I'd like to share with you. I'd like to end with actually the last piece of archival information that I found while doing this research this summer, and I think it really beautifully encapsulates the power of bell ringing for Arthur. This was a letter that he wrote to his wife Elizabeth, actually in the year before his death. He writes, "Dear Elizabeth, everything is running so smoothly here that I have nothing to report except the solemn fact that I have attained today my 82nd birthday. When young, I used to think of octogenarians as relics of previous generations tottering on the brink of the grave. However that may be, it is certain that whatever their apparent physical condition may be, their years are few. In realization of that fact, I must prepare to close up shop and be on the lookout for a pair of wings and harp. But I shall try to exchange the harp for a musical bell of moderate weight. I am wondering how we are to occupy our time when we land in heaven if we are so fortunate as to reach that celestial abode. Affectionately, Arthur. On September 9, 1922, just 4 months before his death, Dr. Nichols wrote this endearing note to his wife. Already into his 80s, Arthur was patently aware of his mortality. Perhaps a life professionally but devoted to medicine had prepared him for his forthcoming demise. During his long career, Dr. Nichols was equally wedded to his vocational and avocational pursuits. He thoroughly enjoyed his professional life as diagnostician and medical legal consultant, but he cherished the moments when he could set aside his work and spend time enraptured by bells. His engagement with music, therefore, served as a crucial grounding mechanism. It helped him take his mind off of medical matters, consequently refreshing his spirit and serving as an imperative source of reinvigoration. For Dr. Nichols, bell ringing was as vibrant an aspect of his identity as was medicine, and it was the relationship between the two that helped cement his unique legacy at the threshold of the artistic and scientific worlds. Thank you.